بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. ما صلى على وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أحسب الناس أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. الله يترك ويكون وآله. This verse from Surah Ankabut, the second verse, أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون, has a particular importance that inshallah we'll start to dissect in our second question. But the first question we ask tonight and we start our discussion about is when we talk about the characteristics of Allah and we talk about the importance of the characteristic of justice of Allah. Now often when we ask this question, or we are asked this question, it's a very critical question about the justice of Allah, and it's very critical to have the understanding of the justice of Allah, because many people, when we look at this world, we start to have shubahat, doubts about, is Allah truly present because of the conditions we see in this world? There was a man who was a pastor in New York. He says, I spent 18 years as a Protestant under the faith of my fathers and I became a priest. Then I left that faith and I became a Catholic, and I was a Catholic priest for 47 years. And then he says, I left the faith altogether. Someone asked him why. He says, when I looked at the world and the condition of the world and the problems of the people, I could no longer convince myself that God was present. That how can there be a merciful God present when there is so much suffering in the world? So meaning that it's one of the first attacks that nowadays is presented by atheists who say that the world is ruled by anarchy. The world is what you make of it. There are people who take advantage of it and make it a bad world, and then there are others who take it, support it and make it a good world. So we have to prepare for these concepts because our children will ask us these questions as well too. And we answer for the basis of not just Islam, but theism. The recognition that Allah exists within the world is supported through the idea that there is a just God present. So typically the first question or the first arena that it comes into is that how can we say that God is just when there are children who are born with illnesses and diseases, and an innocent child is born, and na'uz billah, or may Allah forgive us for our sins, that there are children who are born without limbs or with other health problems. A child is innocent. A child hasn't committed any action. Why would Allah make a child be born with such illness? And this is the first way that we're attacked. And we're attacked in this way primarily because that's the first thing that disagrees with the intellect. Is that a man, it's possible he may commit a sin and God punishes him for the sin in this life. Which is again an incorrect concept. That maybe, for example, if I go through a difficulty in this life or I have a problem, it's a punishment for my actions. No, hold on. We're getting ahead of ourselves. But in the case of a child hasn't committed any sin. Why is Allah punishing a child? Most of these questions you'll see, the first thing that you have to do is you have to put all of the pieces of the puzzle in perspective. Everything has a perspective. Questions have to be addressed in the correct diagnosis. The same way yesterday when we talked about the idea of qibla and saying that Allah needs qibla, we realized no, the perspective is incorrect. We need qibla. Allah doesn't need qibla. It's us who need a direction to point in. In the same way, when we take a look at these questions about the justice of Allah, we have to point the question in the right direction. We have to reframe the situation. Always remember, many of the problems, the same way with math problems, are the basis of perspective. Understanding what are the pieces of the puzzle. When it comes to children in particular, it's not that Allah has necessarily punished the child. No. When it comes to children, it is the result of the lineage and the genetics present within the family. And this concept of genetics is not something that's denied by Islam. As a matter of fact, our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to talk about the idea that genetics is a factor as well too, when he says, تزوجوا في حجز صالح فإن العرق دساس. He says, marry into good families, marry into good clans, because the irq, the blood, or in what we would understand it as the genetics, play a factor. They affect the outcome of your children. And when we take a look now at what modern sciences can tell us about genetics, is very critical, it's very interesting because it supports this concept. Right? Initially what they did was, there was a study about 10 years ago that came out that said that even smoking a cigarette can affect the genetics that you pass on to your children. Many of the respiratory diseases that happen within children are the result of the parents smoking cigarettes prior to even conception. Especially in men. Not that the man is free, no, even a man, especially a man. Then they came out recently with studies that even the food that you consume can affect the genetic material that you pass on to your children. For example, you can predispose your children to like junk food or to have a disposition that they want junk food. Then they went even further, because listen, Islam didn't just stop at what you consume. There's a reason why Allah has appointed certain things that are halal for you and haram for you. Allah says, He has a communication with Nabi Musa. He says, Ya Musa, I love my mu'min, I love the one who believes in me, and therefore I know what is best for him, and I appoint for him the halal for him to consume and the haram for him to stay away from. Because within the haram there are certain effects and certain disadvantages, and within the halal there is certain benefit for him. So yes, we agree that food has the capacity to impact, and now science agrees with it. What we consume, alcohol, whether it be meat that is haram, whether it be, all of these things have a physical impact. But at the same point in time, the akhlaq and the adab and the tarbiyah has an impact too. And up until recently, they used to say that 90% of the genetic code is waste. It doesn't do anything, it's just there. Now they're starting to realize that no, even this has an effect. Recently they released a study which stated that post-traumatic stress disorder that can be initiated by a traumatic event in the life of a parent, he can pass that effect down to his children. A child who has never been through the same experience as the father can be afraid or can have a hesitation because of an experience of the father. Subhanallah. Meaning even our characteristics, our akhlaq, our behavior passes to our children. Passes to our children even before they are conceived. So meaning that it's not just, now that I want to have children, I need to be careful of my actions. Or now that I'm married and I want to have kids, I have to become a good Muslim. No, this aspect of behaving in an Islamic fashion begins from the beginning. When you establish your characteristics from your youth, that we teach our children to consume halal, avoid haram, avoid sin, these aspects develop into their characteristics that they pass on to the next generation. And we see the benefits of this, for example, when we take a look at examples such as Allama Hilli. Now when we look at Allama Hilli, we see that he was a person who was a mujtahid, who was teaching people ijtihad at the age of 9. There's a story where when he is teaching a class, because of his youthful age of 9, a bird comes into the class and sits, and Allama Hilli gets distracted by the bird so much so that he catches the bird, plays with it, and then lets it go in the middle of teaching a lesson. Yani he's a child, his students are elders above him, and his childish nature, but he had the intellectual capacity. We see in other instances when we talk about, for example, Allama Hilli is when his uncle is chasing him, and Allama Hilli, to get away from his uncle, recites the verses of Wajib Sajda. His uncle, who is baligh, then has to stop and perform the sajda upon hearing the verse, and Allama Hilli runs away because he does not have taqreef. We see other examples where the father of Allama Hilli, who was a scholar himself, who was a mujtahid himself, who was an alim and a leader of the people of the time himself, and used to lead prayers in a masjid, he comes out of the masjid and he sees his son separating shoes. He says, Yabni, what are you doing? Oh my son, what are you doing? He says, I am separating the shoes of the people of heaven from the people of hell. It's a very interesting story, and the effect of how this results and what his father does is also very interesting. His father goes to the store and purchases some yogurt, brings the yogurt from the store and feeds it to his son, and removes the ability of his son to see the impact of the spiritual weight of people from his eyes. He didn't feed his child anything haram. No. He fed him something mubah, permissible. But the possibility or the impact that it may have had interacted with something that is impure was sufficient to remove the effect before his eyes. Yani, if we purify ourselves and we purify our children and we are conscientious of what our children consume, they can attain higher levels of piety than we can. And we have that impact. And in the same way that we have the impact to do goodness for them, we have the impact that through our actions we can do bad for them. And it's not just us necessarily, it's sometimes our forefathers. A man came to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, Ya Rasulullah, you see my skin, I have a dark colored skin. My wife, she has dark colored skin as well too. Look, Ya Rasulullah, this is my child. He looks as if he is blonde. His hair is light colored, his skin is light colored, his eyes are a different color than mine or my wife's. I don't think this is my son. Now our Prophet, he knows the concepts of genetics and recessive traits and presence in genotype versus the phenotype, and what's the apparent nature and what's the hidden nature. However, how do you sit there with a man who has come with a question like this in the time of the Prophet? Our Prophet and our Ahlul Bayt always answered people in the capacity that they had to absorb. So the Prophet says to him, what do you do? What is your profession? He says, I raise camels, I have camels. So the Prophet says, then tell me something. Has it never happened to you that you breed 2 brown camels and the offspring of the 2 brown camels is a red camel? He says, yes, Rasulullah, I've seen this. This happens. It's not unheard of for this to happen. As a matter of fact, we know sometimes how to make this happen. So Rasulullah says, in the same way, this is your child. This is the same way as that red camel comes from 2 brown camels, this blonde child comes from 2 dark-skinned people. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The point to say is even the families, the generations, the background of a family is important as well too. That it plays a factor. And we should educate our children, not that I will tell you who to marry and you will marry that person. No, but rather educate them that when you marry, you want your children to be better than you want to have better akhlaq than you. Teach them the intellectual way of what is the benefit for them in selecting a good spouse. Teach them what is the right way to select the characteristics in a spouse so that they want and desire a spouse who has good akhlaq, good tarbiyat, who is a mu'min. Because if you're not taking this time to discuss with them, everybody else is talking to them. Everybody else is tempting them with desires. Everybody else is tempting them with what they want them to chase after. And if you're not having conversations to educate them intellectually on what are the benefits of selecting a good spouse, one day they will come to you and say, well, this is the spouse I have selected. And at that point in time, to change their mind or their perspective will be very difficult. In most cases, it's impossible. But the same way we see when we take a look at a child that sometimes that child has good characteristics, it's because of the parents. Sometimes that child has bad characteristics, it's because of the parents. Most of the time, it's that genetics. It's what you did in your life, what your parents did in their life, what their parents did in their life that is coming out in the generations. This is why when we take a look at Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, I came from the backbone of Adam. Allah placed me and Ali together in the backbone of Adam, and together we stayed from the backbone of Adam until we came to Abdul Muttalib. And Allah never placed us in the backbone of anyone except that it was the best of creation at the time. Meaning that whoever was the carrier of our Prophet had to be the best amongst the people to be worthy to carry our Prophet. The same way, when we select someone, we should select the best person possible to raise our children with, and raise our children in such a way that they are the best and most worthy people to have good offspring. And this is our obligation, this is our responsibility. So when we see a shortcoming in a child, most often it's not because of some sin within the child, but the result of the actions of the parents that bring about these results in a child. Allah is not punishing the child, it's because of the poor choices of the parent that the child has a shortcoming. Most of the people in our day and age, when they select a spouse, they're not selecting a good mother for their children. They're selecting someone who may satisfy their desires or attractions, or someone who satisfies them. They don't take into consideration that this person shall be the mother of my children or the father of my children. It is as much the women. And look for those good characteristics that will make them a good parent for their children. And this becomes important. So it's not necessarily that Allah makes a child sick or ill, but rather that the parents, through their selection of their choices or their spouses, bring about shortcomings in their offspring. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I think you're all a little tired today, huh? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This salawat again, just to make sure. Ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So we see in this aspect that, okay, fine, we can say from one aspect that, all right, fine, when we see a problem in children, that, okay, maybe it comes from the source or what's coming behind it. But what about when we see disasters that exist in this world? What about when we see, for example, tsunamis that occur, or hurricanes that occur, or earthquakes that occur? Can we blame it on people for that too? Or what about, for example, innocent people who get caught in wars of other people, as in Iraq right now, who are being persecuted for nothing except their faith? Or people who are caught between in the fighting in, for example, Gaza that's happening now, or the innocent people in Bahrain who are being attacked because of their faith, or the people in Pakistan who are being slaughtered because of their faith, or even similar problems that are occurring in India. Can we blame the individuals for that? This is where, again, we return back to perspective, and we have to look at the idea of perspective. If we were to say that this world that we live in is supposed to be paradise for us, and then in a world that is your paradise, you suffer, we would say God is unjust. Because the purpose of this world then would be to be pleasurable for you, to be enjoyable for you, and there is something that prevents you from taking peace and pleasure in this world. But when we take a look at the Quran, we see that Allah says, وَمَا هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَحْوًا وَلَعِبًا وَإِنَّ دَارَ الْآخِرَةِ لَهِيَ الْحَيْوَانِ. Meaning that he says, and what is this life except for a plaything and something simple, and truly the life of the hereafter is the real life. Meaning that this is not a pleasurable place for you. This is not a place that you should be having fun and be happy. That's not the purpose of this life. That's the purpose of the next life. That's the purpose of the next location where you will be, not this location. This location is not a place of pleasure, but rather it's a test. This is why we see even Nabi Isa, he used to tell his companions, he says, this world is like a bridge. Don't build your house and think that you will stay forever on the bridge, but rather recognize it is a place to pass through and pass through it. See, Amir al-Mu'mineen used to have similar sayings where he used to tell people that this is a temporary place. Don't make your abode in this place, make your abode for the hereafter. So when we start to recognize that this world is not a place that's supposed to be pleasurable for us, that it's supposed to be a place that is a test for us, we see the ayah in Quran as we started with, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يَفْتَنُونَ. Do people think that they will say we have faith and they will be left alone and they won't be tested? وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَجُوءٍ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Allah is telling you, I will test you with fear. I will test you with hunger. I will test you with loss of wealth. I will test you with yourselves and difficulties within yourself. And I will test you with loss of children. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And give good news to the patient ones. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ فَقَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. So give news, those are the ones who are patient are the ones that when difficulties befall them, they say, surely we are from Allah and to Allah we return. Meaning that we should recognize that this life for us is just a passing phase, that this is a place of testing. This is a place when you say that you have faith, Allah will test you. And He will test you from everything that is valuable in this life. Everything that you think is something that you want as a possession, it will come as a test before you. Sometimes it will be your spouses, sometimes it will be your children, sometimes it will be fear from the government or fear from the attack of terrorism. Sometimes it will be from loss of business and loss of wealth, that you will face losses in your business. Sometimes it will be various difficulties that you will go through. Your health at times will fail you. You will not have aspects of your health that you will need. But recognize that this world is temporary. There's an example from the falasifa that I'll share with you if you recite a good salawat for me. The Islamic philosophers, they present this concept. They say that we are present even now, in some respect, within the world of the hereafter. That even now we have some presence in the hereafter. Yet we're not aware of it. So they ask them how. The example comes the same way a child, when a child is in the womb. When a child is in the womb, he's present in this world. He's in this world, but he himself is unaware of his presence within this world. That child is only aware of the 9 months in that womb. We who are outside of the womb can recognize that that time period within the womb is very small. It's nothing. In comparison to a lifespan, that womb is nothing. It's a very short period of time. But the child that's in the womb, that 9 months is forever. That's his whole life. That's his existence. And then when he comes outside, then the new life starts, and this life that in comparison to the womb that was nothing, then he realizes what is life. In the same way, we are in a phase that exists within the Darul Akhirah. And right now, we think this life is the life that we should be paying attention to. We get caught up, we get confused that this is the real life. But really, the life after this one is the true life. The one where we will either be rewarded for our actions or we will be punished for them. The one where then there is no death. There is a narration from our Ahlul Bayt that explains, that says, on the day of Akhirah, when all the people are gathered on Yawmul Qiyamah, Allah will have Maut stand amongst the middle of the people, and it will be in the shape of a sheep, and it will be slaughtered, and Allah will say that after this day there is no death for you. If you have done good, you will enjoy the bounties and there will be no end to them. And if you have done evil, then you will ask for death, but it will not come. The punishment will not end. the pain will not stop. These are the nights of Qadr. These are the nights of, this is the month of Ramadan, the month of mercy. Take these nights very importantly, because what happens to us sometimes is we become tired because of our jobs, because of our other responsibilities that we have in this life, which are important. We can't let them go. But make sacrifices from yourself and be conscientious of that sacrifice and say, oh Allah, I am sacrificing from my peace and my comfort now, so that then you give me peace and comfort. I am sacrificing with what you have given me control over, so that tomorrow when you have control of everything, you give me goodness. In the same way, we have to take a look at when we have difficulties in this life. If we recognize the difficulties that befall us in this life from every aspect to be a test for us, and the successful one is the patient one, we must be patient. We have to bear those difficulties with the best of characteristics. Rather than becoming upset, becoming angry, sometimes what happens is when we face difficulty, we make our family face the difficulty as well too. Not intentionally, unintentionally. It spills over. We become very frustrated when we don't receive the rizq that we expect, or when we have health problems, or when things don't work the way we expect them to. But if we were to put them in the correct perspective and recognize that these are tests from Allah, that this is Allah putting me through a test to raise my caliber, the first thing we would realize is that there are some things you will be tested with and other things which have no value to test you with. A mu'min, alcohol is not a test for him. It doesn't have any benefit. A mu'min, a believer in the Ahlul Bayt, does not worry about alcohol. It has nothing to do with him. Haram food is not, McDonald's is not a test for you. You look at McDonald's, it has no appeal to you. Baba, this is haram, I know this, I don't want this. Maybe the test comes in the form of something like backbiting, ghibah. This ghibah is a very, very dangerous thing. This backbiting, this talking about a mu'min believer behind his back is very dangerous. Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam, in explaining this concept of fasting, he says every single action you do while fasting is ibadat, is worship. The sleep is worship, the breathing is worship, the sitting is worship, the standing is worship, the looking is worship, the silence is worship. Except when you backbite your brother, then Allah stops all of the reward from you. Look at how important it is. And these days when we are in the masajid, when we are amongst our brothers, we should be careful. Because the way this life works, we see John, Joe, Bob outside for a few hours a day, and we know that John, Joe, Bob has no value to us. Muhammad, Ali, Abbas, Haydar, we see all the time. Which is why we see most of the time the conflicts that exist are between Abbas and Ali, not Abbas and Joe. Because you're always with each other, you're always spending time with each other. The same way in this month, you're spending time with each other. Ensure that you overlook each other's faults and mistakes. Don't discuss them. You think I don't know when I make a mistake? Of course I know when I make a mistake. Each of us knows when we have a mistake. We don't need someone else to come and point it out to us. Hey, you know when you said this, you didn't look nice when you were talking. Or you shouldn't use bad words, or you shouldn't. No, if you're going to chide someone, it holds no value. If you're going to talk bad about someone behind their back, it holds no value. The way that you educate one another is the way that it shows value in action. It shows value in how you teach someone the correct way. And that example comes from our Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Our Prophet was never known to chide anyone. He was never known to point out people's shortcomings. He was never known to chase after people who made mistakes, to tell them, you make this mistake, you better correct yourself. But when he saw something, or when he heard of someone making a mistake, or when he saw them make a mistake, he would feel sad, and he would express his sadness and pray that the person corrects that action. And when he would see goodness, he would compliment that goodness and promote that goodness. And he would always be the first to perform goodness amongst the people, so that people would follow his example. This is how we reform society. Not by calling out people's mistakes, not by talking about each other behind our backs. That is our test. That is one of our biggest tests that we have to be patient with. When we see something we don't like, we are patient. When we go through an experience we don't like, we are patient. When we go through something that raises anger within us, we are patient. And the best example of this patience comes from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Our Prophet narrates, he says, when I went to Mi'raj, Allah honored me with the status that He called me to Mi'raj. And He honored Ali ibn Abi Talib by permitting him to remove all the curtains that he could see me and I could see him. And Allah spoke to me and He gave me the message that gives salam to Ali ibn Abi Talib from me. Tell Ali that I have appointed him your wasi. Tell Ali that he is your khalifa. Tell Ali that he will be the one who will separate the mu'mineens, the believers, from the disbelievers. Tell Ali that I have affixed for him the source of all of the problems that will come. Tell Ali that all of the musibah that will fall the Ahlul Bayt will fall on him. When my Prophet heard this, he pleaded with Allah. He said, "Oh Allah, this Ali that I love, this Ali that I raise with my hands, truly will you make him the one who suffers the most? Will you make him the one who has to go through the most of difficulties?" And Allah says, "I have decreed it and it is so. Bear with patience." Salama narrates that one day I came to visit the Prophet and I knocked on his door and he did not give me permission to enter. When he didn't give me permission to enter, I became worried. Did I do something wrong? Has Allah sent a verse against me? Have I done something that upset the Prophet and Allah? She knocked again. And again, the Prophet didn't answer. Again, the fear in Salama's heart increased, that some way I have hurt my Prophet. The third time Salama says, when I knocked with fear in my heart and hope of what would I find, and my Prophet let me in. When I entered the room, I saw the Prophet sitting and Amir al-Mu'mineen sitting on his knees in front of the Prophet saying, "Ya Rasulullah, then what should I do? Then what is your command for me if such and such should befall me?" "Oh Ali, be patient. Ya Ali, sabr karna. Thumma ya Rasulullah madha. Then what should I do, O Prophet, after that?" "Isbir ya Ali, be patient." "Thumma madha ya Rasulullah." "O Ali, after that I give you the permission to draw your sword and put it on your shoulder and remove their heads step by step until you meet me on the pool of Kawthar." Salama says, "Ya Rasulullah, are you upset with me that you did not let me enter?" The Prophet says, "No, I was in communication where Ali sat on one side and Jibreel on the other, and Jibreel was telling me to convey to Ali all the difficulties that will befall after him, after I leave. Oh Ali, they will steal your right. Oh Ali, they will attack you in the worst of fashions. Oh Ali, they will knock down the door on Fatima. Oh Ali, Muhsin will become shaheed. Oh Ali, they will put a noose around your neck and drag you through the streets of Medina." Be patient, be patient. Oh Ali, you will see people abuse your right. Be patient. My Imam, there was no one more patient than my master. When we say we are the Shia of Ali, our first action is to be patient. Un jaisa sabir to koi na tha. जो कि जब वाक़या दरवाज़े का हुआ और मौला को सड़कों से लेके जा रहे हैं गर्दन से घसीटते हुए, जब किसी ने कहा कि अली को घर से कैसे निकालें, जवाब आया खिलाफत से कि सबसे बदतरीन हाल में अली को उसके घर से निकालना, क्योंकि हमने सुना है कि रसूल खुदा ने कहा था अली से कि सब्र करना, तो अली सब्र करेगा। اس پہ ظلم ڈھاؤ. اس حالت کو دیکھتے ہوئے جب سیدہ فاطمہ گھر سے نکلی، پہلو شکستہ ہے، علی کے پیچھے آئیں، کہا یا ملعونین، علی کو چھوڑ دو، علی کو چھوڑ دو. قمبر کو حکم ملا آگے سے کہ فاطمہ کو بھی مارو. آگے سے صدا فاطمہ سے آتی ہے، اب میں تم سے بیان نہیں کرتی کہ علی کو چھوڑو، بس مجھے نہ مارو. اس حال میں جب علی لے جائے گے خلیفہ کے سامنے، فاطمہ زہرا آتی ہے اور بد دعا کے لیے ہاتھ بلند کرتی ہے. کہتے ہیں کہ مدینے کی دیواریں جو تھیں زمین سے اٹھ گئیں اس حد تک کہ ایک اونٹ بھی اگر جا سکتا تو دیوار کے نیچے سے گزر سکتا. فاطمہ نے کہا کہ اب اگر تم نے علی کو نہ چھوڑا میں بد دعا کے لیے ہاتھ بلند کروں گی. اس حال میں جب خلیفہ نے چھوڑا اور فاطمہ اور علی اپنے گھر کو جا رہے ہیں، علی فاطمہ سے پوچھتے ہیں، یا فاطمہ تمہارا صورتحال کیا ہے، کس حال میں تمہیں پہچانتے ہیں؟ فاطمہ نے آگے سے جواب دیا. سیدہ جواب دیتی ہیں، کہتی ہیں یا علی اگر تم صبر کرو گے میں صبر کروں گی، اگر تم صابر ہو میں صابر ہوں. تو مولا نے کہا کہ ہمارے نبی نے، ہمارے حبیب نے ہمیں حکم دیا کہ ہم صبر کریں گے تو ہم صبر کریں گے یا فاطمہ. تو اس حال میں بھی میرے مولا نے صبر کیا. اور آج اس دن میں جب ان کو زخم لگ چکا ہے اور زہر جسم میں جاری ہے اور تڑپ ہے جسم میں زہر کے اثر سے، میرا مولا پھر صابر ہے. ایک صحابی تھا، وہ کہتا ہے کہ میرے سے گزارا نہ گیا تو میں دروازے کے سامنے جا کے بیٹھ گیا. امام حسن نے ہمیں حکم دیا ہوا تھا کہ ہم گھر کے پاس نہ آئیں اس وقت میں جب مولا گھر آ گئے ہیں. آگے سے اندر سے کہتا ہے میں نے صدا سنی کہ بیویوں کی رونے کی صدا بلند ہوئی. جب بیویوں کی رونے کی صدا بلند ہوئی ایسی دردناک آواز اٹھی کہ میرا بھی رونا نکل گیا. آگے کہتا ہے کہ امام حسن باہر آئے تو انہوں نے مجھے دیکھا، کیا تم نے حکم کو نہیں ملا کہ یہاں پہ تمہیں اجازت نہیں ہے؟ مولا آپ اگر مجھے ایک دفعہ اجازت دے دے میں اپنے آقا مولا کو ایک دفعہ اور ملنا چاہوں گا، ایک دفعہ کی اجازت دے دے. امام حسن نے اجازت دی. صحابی کہتا ہے کہ میں اندر داخل ہوا تو میں نے دیکھا کہ میرے مولا کا سر جو ہے ایک پیلے امامے میں باندھا ہے کس کے. جب میں نے امامہ دیکھا اور پھر مولا کی شکل کو دیکھا، مجھے یہ نہ پتہ چل سکا کہ مولا کا امامہ زیادہ پیلا ہے کہ ان کا رنگ زیادہ پیلا ہو گیا زہر کے اثر سے اور خون کی کمی سے. میں نے جب رونا شروع اپنے مولا کی حالت کو دیکھ کے تو مولا فرماتے ہیں تم رونا، یقیناً میں جنت میں جاؤں گا. کہا مولا مجھے رونا اس پہ نہیں ہے کہ مجھے خوف ہے آپ کہاں جا رہے ہیں، مجھے رونا اس بات کا ہے کہ میں آپ سے علیحدہ کیسے ہوں، آپ کی جدائی میں کیسے میں رہوں. مولا صبر کرنا، مولا کا حکم آیا صبر کرنا. یا مولا ایک آپ کا صبر تھا اور ایک آپ کے بیٹے حسین کا صبر تھا کربلا میں. ایک وہ صبر تھا جس نے علی اکبر کے سینے سے برچی کا پھل نکالا. ایک وہ صبر تھا جس نے عباس جیسے بھائی کے لاشے کو دیکھا. ایک وہ صبر تھا جس نے قاسم جیسے بیٹے کو دیکھا. ایک وہ صبر تھا جس نے علی اصغر جیسے لال کو شہید ہوتے دیکھا. جب سوچتے ہیں کہ 6 ماہ کا بچہ جب اسے تیر لگتا ہے اور گلا جو ہے چھد جاتا ہے، کس طرح ایک 6 مہینے کا بچے کا جسم کانپتا ہے، لہراتا ہے. ملعونی نے خود دیکھا کہ ہم نے دیکھا کہ ایسا اس بچے کا جسم کانپا. ہم نے فخر کیا کہ یہ حسین نے کیسے برداشت کر لیا، یہ کیسے صبر کر لیا. پھر اس کے بعد جب مولا کی خود جنگ آتی ہے وہ کہتے ہیں ہم نے تو سوچا تھا کہ حسین ضعیف ہو گئے، ہم نے سوچا جس نے سارے اپنے اصحابوں کو، دوستوں کو، بیٹوں کو، بھائیوں کو اصغر جیسے لال کو شہید ہوتے دیکھا وہ جنگ کیسے کرے گا. اور وہ حسین کا صبر تھا کہ جب تلوار چلی فوج پہ فوج دوڑنے لگی. کہا ہم نے ایسا بہادر ایسا صابر کبھی نہ دیکھا، ہم نے ایسا نہ دیکھا جو ایسے ظلم کو صبر سے لے سکے. ہم نے وہ نہ دیکھا کہ جب شمر اس کے سینے پہ بیٹھا ہے
جب شمر تلوار چلا رہا ہے تو وہ اس حالت میں امام زمان لکھتے ہیں کہ وہ میرا جد حسین جو اس حال میں جبکہ موت کا فکر اس کے ذہن پہ ہونا چاہیے، جبکہ موت کی مشکل سے اس کو جو ہے تڑپ رہے ہونا چاہیے، وہ اپنے ہاتھ کھولتا ہے اور بند کرتا ہے، وہ اپنے پیروں کو ہلاتا ہے. کیوں؟ کیونکہ مولا نے کہا کہ جب تک میں زندہ ہوں میری عورتوں پہ کوئی ناوار کرے. میرا مولا وہ صابر ہے جس نے تلوار کے چلتے ہوئے اپنے ہاتھ پاؤں ہلائے کہ اے ملعون دیکھ حسین ابھی زندہ ہے، ہماری عورتوں کی طرف نہ جانا، میں صبر کرتا رہوں گا، تم ان کی طرف نہ جانا. الا لعنت اللہ علی القوم الظالمین وسيعلم الذین ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم حسین.